What horrifying thing happened to you in the middle of the night? I woke up to the sounds of two people burgling my house, jumped out of bed, grabbed my bat and went to investigate. As soon as they heard me they legged it. I then phoned the police. As soon as I got off the phone I went into shock, sitting on my bedroom floor in my boxers clutching a bat in case they came back. They never did, but that was 3 years ago now, and still to this day if I hear even the slightest sound at night I'm fully alert and waiting for it to happen again. The paranoia has stayed with me since that evening.
That sounds pretty intense. Waking up to a burglary must have been a real shock. It's understandable that you'd feel paranoid after such an experience. It can change how you react to sounds at night. Even after 3 years, those feelings can linger. Just trying to stay safe in your own space is a common thing after an event like that. Hope things have settled down for you since then.
This happened a year ago. My family was all asleep at 3 a.m. when I awoke to scratching at the front door. I peeked through the window to find a beaten, bloody young woman, sitting cross-legged on my front step, staring back at me. It was my neighbor. Her left eye was swollen shut, she had a laceration on her head. I opened the door and tried to get her to come inside. She was extremely drunk, and hardly wearing anything on this winter, windy, rainy day. She was babbling and not making any sense. I called 911, but when she realized I was calling for help, she screamed and climbed over my chain-link fence, flopping onto the ground. She ran down the street, flailing her arms, screaming. I thought her boyfriend had beat her up. They had known domestic violence issues. Come to find out, earlier that day, she got rip-roaring drunk, then tripped and hit her head on concrete. The laceration on her head actually had stitches in it already, which I couldn't see in the dark. When she got home from the ER, she stole her roommate's whiskey and pounded most the bottle. Then, she just went berserk.
Sounds like a mix of bad decisions and chaos all around. It's good that you called for help though. It's tough to see someone in that state, especially when they're not being safe. At least you found out the truth behind what happened. Just going through that must have been pretty wild.
Heard blood-curdling shrieks from outside my house. Before I go further I should mention that I live in a rural setting and I could tell this was an animal, not a person. I don't have any pets, and my neighbors keep theirs inside, so whatever it was nature having its way. In the daylight I could see deer tracks crossing my front lawn in the snow, with tracks from a big cat, i.e. cougar, coming from a different angle, intercepting it where there was a huge crescent of blood sprayed across the snow. From there, the cat tracks, drag marks, and a blood trail went into the woods.
That sounds pretty intense. You've got nature doing its thing right in your backyard. It's interesting to see those tracks and the signs of a kill. Definitely a reminder of the wild side of rural life. It's kind of eerie but fascinating to witness how animals interact. You'll probably see more of that in the winter when food is sparse. Just stay safe out there.
I fell asleep and woke up to the door being bashed in and doorbell being smashed. In my sleepiness I thought it was my sister after forgetting her key after taking the dog out. I didn't realize it was like 2/3 am. I get up when I think nobody is getting up to let her in. I go down and open the door. And this barely dressed girl falls in on top of me. I grab her and shove her out the door, out of the porch and into the arms of a guy standing in our front garden. I blink and look at them and the taxi's still waiting outside. The girl is completely fuck drunk and the guy is so confused. I tell him wrong house and he proceeds to drag the girl over the low garden wall. We had a small gate and they didn't seem to use it, and get into the taxi and leave. To this day my dad always brings it up. He thinks they were scoping out the place to rob the place and that was their cover to get someone to open the door.
That's quite an unusual way to wake up. Sounds like a pretty wild scene, especially at that hour. It's funny how you thought it was your sister. You never know what goes on sometimes.
A few years ago, I think I was maybe 18, I was in a really bad situation as far as living goes, and I like to take really long walks out at night. One night, I was in a field at about 3 a.m. and saw an owl perched atop a dead tree. It eyed me for a good minute and a half before taking off. Owls have always made me uneasy, so I decided to head home. On the way back, and on the darkest road possible, 2 dogs came up to the street from my right. At first I thought they were wolves. They really looked it, but one was solid black, the other solid white. They didn't look at me, and they didn't approach me. They just stood at the edge of the road as I walked by. For some reason, I was terrified. I looked straight ahead as well. After I passed, they started walking across the street behind me and just kept going. Now I know this doesn't sound scary to most people, but my late father and I are Chickamauga Cherokees, and it's very reminiscent of an old story he'd once told me about. More of an eye-opener than a suspenseful fright, but I don't remember ever being that scared before or after that.
Seeing an owl and then those dogs must have felt significant, especially with your background.
When I was about 5 or 6, I woke up and saw an old woman standing in the doorway of my bedroom. She didn't say anything, just looked at me silently and stood there, but I was filled with the most horrible sense of dread I've ever felt in my life. I was absolutely terrified of this woman, and I hid under my covers and would peek out every few minutes to see if she was there. After what felt like hours, but was probably only like 15 minutes, she was gone when I looked. I ran into my parents' room crying, and my dad searched my room and the rest of the house but didn't find anyone. I slept with them for the rest of the night. I never did find a good explanation for what I saw, but a lot of other weird things happened in that house before we moved a few years later. Scariest thing I've ever seen to this day.
That sounds pretty unsettling. It's interesting that other weird things happened in the house too.
I have 1. When I was younger, I used to sleep on the top of a bunk bed. We had a pet cat that I thought couldn't get to my bed since she's never been up there in the few years we had owned her. Well, one night she decides to get up there and jump onto my stomach with more force than I could believe. Scared the shit out of me since I had the wind knocked out of me and I could see the silhouette of some creature on my bed next to me. 2. I had some creepy-ass dream where I believe I'm awake, but I'm stuck on my bed with my eyes closed, and no matter what I can't move a single muscle. I hear something screaming, "I know I am here, I know you can hear me," and other creepy shit like that. I was terrified cause I don't know I'm dreaming. I legit think I'm frozen in fear with this ghost thing just yelling at me. I woke up in a cold sweat and couldn't sleep well for the next few days. Shit seemed too real. Edit, yes, the second one is sleep paralysis. Please stop repeating the same thing over and over in the comments.
The cat jumping on you must have been a shock, especially thinking it couldn't reach you. As for the dream, sleep paralysis can definitely mess with your mind. Feeling stuck and hearing those sounds would be chilling.
Okay, forgive me, but this is an hour later, around 4:15 a.m. I decided to go for a run, so I set out at about 4 a.m. and as I was passing a local park I noticed a man loitering in the only light at the park. Now I'm a pretty fast runner, fast enough that I was never worried about other people when running because I was confident I was in better shape than any potential assailants. That being said, as I made eye contact, or what I perceived to be eye contact as I could only make out skin color due to my speed and the distance between us, I decided to up my pace and move into the empty street. As I passed the man and moved into a patch of poorly lit street, I heard footsteps behind me. I kept running and eventually looked back and caught a glimpse of something behind me, let out a loud scream, and sprinted about 1.5 miles to a well-lit street with a decent amount of cars before I finally stopped and re-vaulted how I was going to get home. I decided to go the extra mile, literally, and go around the street where I saw the man, but I never escaped the feeling I was being watched/chased the entire way home. It didn't help that I'm a true crime nerd and could only think of Jeffrey Dahmer retelling his jogger story.
Running at that hour can be pretty creepy. Seeing someone in the park must have ramped up your paranoia. It's understandable to feel watched, especially with your true crime interests. Getting home safely is what's important. Sounds like a memorable run, but maybe avoid that area late at night next time.
At the time I had a bedroom on the top floor of the house, with a skylight right above my bed. I loved that skylight. You could see the stars and the moon and the occasional meteor. Anyway, one night around 3 I was awakened by the most hellish noise, and I could see through the window that the trees outside were dancing in wind. Suddenly a blinding light came through the skylight and the whole room was filled with a bluish light. I had no idea what was going on. End of the world. Jesus, come to get me. Then I realized the hellish noise was a helicopter and the light was one of those searchlights they use. I know those are common in cities, but I live in a rural area. The light clicked off, the helicopter flew away. The next morning I hear from a sheriff's deputy that a man had broken into a house a mile or so away, had injured the homeowner, then had run off into the night, so they were searching the woods and nearby farms with the helicopter and light.
Sounds like a pretty intense night. I get the whole confusion with the light and noise. It's rare to see that kind of action in a rural area. That must have been a shock to wake up to. At least you found out it was just a search.
I watched Grave Encounters on Netflix, which I actually found pretty scary. I then went out to the kitchen to get something to eat when a hand came out of the doorway to the basement and curled around the door jamb. I screamed, it scared the hell out of me. Turned out it was my mom doing laundry in the basement. She has bad knees, so I guess sometimes when she's coming up the stairs she grabs the door jamb to help pull herself up. She laughed for like 20 minutes. She was startled too, but then found it hilarious. The doorway is at a right angle to the stairs, you go up the stairs and the doorway is to the right, which is why I could only see her hand.
Watching a scary movie can really amp up your senses. It's funny how things can catch you off guard like that, especially when you're not expecting it. Your mom's reaction must have lightened the mood, though. It's good she could laugh it off.
Fell asleep on the couch, woke up around 3:30 a.m., still half asleep. I grabbed a drink, turned the lights out and was about to head up when I paused in the living room for a second. Meanwhile, outside, the newspaper lady had just pulled up and fired a Saturday edition from her car off the front aluminum screen door of the house. The bang it made was so loud I thought someone shot a gun off behind my head. I swear there was a flash as well, but I dunno. Wife found me in the morning curled up in a ball right where I was standing. We don't speak about that incident anymore.
It's funny how those moments stick with us, even if we don't talk about them later. Curled up in a ball is vivid. Sometimes it's just easier to let things go.
I had just gotten a puppy who was tethered on a leash to the bedpost so he couldn't escape the area that had been tarped for his accidents. So I get the pup ready for bed in his little setup and I go to bed myself. Wake up in the middle of the night to my bed shaking violently and the puppy is gone. I had just watched a scary movie the night before and was convinced I was going to die. When I finally got the courage to look to see what was shaking the bed, I saw puppy butt sticking out. Poor dude had tried to get underneath and had gotten stuck, not realizing how big he was getting.
The idea of a puppy getting stuck under the bed is funny, especially after a scary movie. Must have been a surprising wake-up call. It's nice to see they have a bit of a playful side, even if it causes some chaos. Just another story to tell about your puppy.
Was half asleep, having just spent time dealing with a feverish infant. He had been at the clinic earlier that afternoon, getting evaluated and blood drawn for cultures. My wife had just finished changing a blowout diaper, when the pediatrician called us and told her to get him to the hospital very quickly. One of the cultures had come back positive and he was very sick. She was sure to convey the urgency to my wife, who woke me and told me about it. We live minutes from the hospital, so an ambulance was a waste of time. I got dressed and everyone to the car faster than I ever had, and was thankful for no traffic at that hour. All manner of traffic laws were broken. He spent 2 weeks in treatment at Mayo, fortunately doing wonderfully now.
Sounds pretty rough. Glad to hear he's doing better now after the treatment. It's always a relief when things turn out okay in the end. Just a lot to handle in a short time. Hope things are calmer for you all now.
We temporarily had a roach infestation at our old place and it was always scary trying to walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night. It was a tiny studio and the closest light to the bed was across the room in our kitchenette. I woke up in the middle of the night and turned the light on while facing the bathroom. Resting on the bathroom door frame were 2 big flying cockroaches. I live in Hawaii where the roaches are huge. They must have been mating partners. My strategy was to grab the raid that I kept in the kitchenette, spray them both and then run to the bed. Walked over slowly, sprayed them, first one fell and ran into the bathroom shower and the second one decided to seek revenge. I backed up towards the other side of the room and this thing starts flying and dive bombs me right in the chest, falling on its back by my feet. My boyfriend wakes up from all the commotion and finishes them off with a slipper and flushes them. That infestation took a while to take care of and it caused a tremendous amount of stress not knowing when you'll get dive bombed or have one end up in your bed with you.
Dealing with roaches at night is no joke. The whole dive bombing thing would freak anyone out. It's rough not knowing when they might show up, especially in such a small space. I can see why that would be stressful. Glad you managed to handle it though.
A few years back I was awake at that time, walking around my house in the dark, contemplating that due to family issues and my job I had to be up at that hour. I had just passed the front door of my house when someone smashed into the door like they were trying to break it down. I freaked the fuck out, looking for a handy weapon as I assume someone is about to smash down the door and murder everyone in the house. No further attempts at breaching the house occur, and when my ride for work arrived a few hours later I can't find any sign of the break-in attempt. About a year later I finally share the event with my father. Rather than dismissing it, as he often does with any threat to security, he proceeds to tell me the story of how he had a similar occurrence years earlier, only in that instance someone was pounding on the side of the house as he sat in the dark in the living room. This really wasn't a story I should have shared before going to bed, as now I've freaked myself out.
That sounds pretty intense. The fact that your dad had a similar experience adds a different layer to it. I get why you'd freak out before going to bed. Just shows how our minds can run wild with fear in the dark.
One of my friends was blacked out drunk sleeping in a room upstairs. He woke up and tried to go downstairs, where a group of us were hanging out. He tripped at the top of the stairs and swan dived face first all the way to the bottom of the steps. We all watched him fall and land, and afterwards was just stunned silence. A huge pool of blood started forming underneath him as we tried to figure out what to do. We should have called an ambulance immediately, but the problem was every single person in the house was tripping balls and had no clue how to handle the situation. Luckily 5 to 10 minutes after the fall, 2 of our friends walk into the door completely sober, randomly coming through to say what's up. It was a party house while I was in college, so not completely unexpected, but still extremely lucky. They drove him to the hospital where we found out he had 16 fractures in the face, broken wrist, broken clavicle, and 2 broken ribs.
That sounds intense. It's wild how quickly things can go downhill at a party. The whole group being out of it, and then getting lucky with sober friends showing up is a crazy coincidence. It's a reminder to always be cautious about drinking and stairs, though. Hope your friend's recovery went well after all those injuries. Definitely an event that won't be forgotten anytime soon.
Fell asleep on the couch while watching TV. Boyfriend in his office in the back of the apartment playing video games with his headset on. All of a sudden, someone starts banging on the door. It was between 3 and 4 a.m. I'm already someone who gets anxiety when people knock on the door. To be woken up like that in the middle of the night was terrifying. I quietly snuck back to get my boyfriend. He went and looked through the peephole. He said it was a disheveled, drunk or drugged-looking dude. The guy knocked a couple more times, then left. Never saw or heard from him again, knock on wood, so he was probably just fucked up and went to the wrong door. Now my door-knocking anxiety is even worse, though.
That sounds pretty unsettling. It's never a good feeling to be woken up like that, especially when you're already anxious about door knocks. Good thing your boyfriend checked it out. Hopefully it was just some guy who made a mistake and nothing more serious. It's rough that the whole thing increased your anxiety, though. I get why you'd be on edge now. Just keep the doors locked.